It's astonishing how a single fairy tale, a bedtime story once cherished by generations, could spark a controversy so massive that even Disney felt cornered. Yet here we are, a new live-action Snow White bombarded by headlines, memes, and angry fans before it even hit streaming. At the center of the uproar lies a messy blend of major story changes, polarizing interviews, and a desperate studio struggling to maintain its reputation for magic. For decades, Snow White stood as Disney's first and most iconic princess, a beacon of hope and innocence whose success launched the entire concept of the feature-length animated film. People once assumed that any new adaptation of her tale would be an automatic success. After all, how could revisiting one of the most beloved fairy tales in cinematic history go wrong? But leaked details, confusing messages, and a lead actress who didn't hold back her opinions combined to create a maelstrom of negative publicity. Before the dust could settle, Disney dropped a bombshell. A second Snow White reboot was already in the works, implying the first had been written off. Was this merely a temporary stumble or a glaring sign of deeper dysfunction within the House of Mouse? This script unravels how a once-treasured classic spawned a PR disaster, questioning whether Disney can emerge intact, or if its legendary magic is starting to fade. Back in 1937, Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs wasn't just a cartoon, it was a groundbreaking cultural event. Audiences were mesmerized by its pioneering animation style, endearing characters, and enchanting musical numbers. Snow White's kind-hearted persona and capacity for optimism, even in the face of danger, made her a symbol of hope, while the dwarfs provided comedic relief and heart. This film set the standard for the Disney princess archetype, gentle, courageous, and defined by timeless charm. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Disney's penchant for live-action remakes has become a core strategy. Films like Cinderella, 2015, and Beauty and the Beast, 2017, showed that audiences still craved fairy tales in a more realistic format, as long as the spirit of the original remained intact. Yet from the outset, rumors hinted this new Snow White would veer from tradition. Online whispers spoke of radical changes to the storyline, focusing on a modern princess who scoffed at old-school ideas of romance. Fans began asking questions. Would the iconic soundtrack, with songs like Someday My Prince Will Come, still be central? Would the dwarfs remain as comedic companions, or be replaced by something entirely different? And would the evil queen's obsession with beauty and vanity remain a driving force? As Disney teased major shifts, some hailed the bravery of fresh storytelling, while others grew skeptical that the studio might tamper too heavily with what made Snow White magical to begin with. Those anxieties only deepened when casting details surfaced, spotlighting a performer with a very different perspective on what Snow White should stand for. The seeds of controversy were sown, and all eyes turned to the actress at the project's forefront, eager to see if she could gracefully merge classic reverence with modern sensibilities. Rachel Z, a rising talent known for her powerful voice, seemed at first like a promising choice. Yet what started as cautious optimism spiraled once she began speaking candidly about the role. In interviews, she labeled the classic prince irrelevant, mocked the old-fashioned romance, and portrayed the 1937 film's vision as antiquated. Such remarks landed like a bombshell among Disney loyalists who grew up adoring the simple purity of Snow White's love story. To them, it felt like the new lead actress was insulting the very foundation of the tale, the idea that hope, kindness, and faith in love could overcome evil. Social media lit up with heated debates, memes, and trending hashtags questioning whether the studio had effectively hired someone who disdained the original's heart. Rather than mending fences, Rachel Z doubled down, emphasizing how the remake would focus on a self-determined heroine who viewed romance as secondary, if not a nuisance. Some applauded her boldness, claiming Disney needed to keep pace with modern ideals. Others found her tone dismissive, suggesting she fundamentally misunderstood the nostalgic essence fans held dear. Still, the controversy might have simmered if the film's official marketing clarified how the story would fuse classic enchantment with new themes. Instead, the silence from Disney felt like an endorsement of Rachel Z's comments, intensifying skepticism. Within weeks, countless reaction videos dissected every new soundbite, and the controversy spread beyond the fan community into mainstream news. For Disney, the timing couldn't have been worse. At a moment when the studio needed excitement and goodwill, it faced swelling distrust and a star seemingly eager to burn bridges with the original's massive fanbase. As the internet does, it quickly slapped a label on the entire fiasco: go woke, go broke. Critics claimed Disney had pushed progressive ideals too far, discarding beloved fairy tale elements in favor of blunt messaging. Some saw the changes as misguided attempts to appear modern, while others insisted the studio was simply making the story more empowering for 21st-century viewers. However, The growing sense was that Disney didn't know how to balance tradition with fresh perspectives. The dwarfs, for instance, became a hot-button issue. Leaked set photos suggested they'd been replaced by a motley crew of magical beings, prompting outraged fans to accuse Disney of erasing the unique charm of Doc, Grumpy, and the rest. Meanwhile, rumors circulated about the prince being almost entirely cut or reduced to a cameo, fueling talk that the film prioritized modern statements over the whimsical romance that defined the original. Was the new film an homage to 1937 or a total reinvention? People who longed for a gentle musical love story were confronted with references to outdated fairy tale tropes. At the same time, Disney's PR teams emphasized that all changes aimed to celebrate Snow White's bravery and compassion. Yet these explanations often clashed with the more flippant remarks from Rachel Z. or other insiders. The narrative became muddled, and each piece of leaked information or off-the-cuff interview remark worsened the disconnect. Instead of galvanizing an excited fanbase, the studio faced a mounting backlash that undercut any chance to build curiosity around the film's actual merits. Behind the scenes, the friction was reportedly intense. Insiders whispered about producers meeting with Rachel Z. to urge her to moderate her public critiques. According to rumors, she remained steadfast, insisting the film needed a radical overhaul to stay relevant. Meanwhile, test screenings hinted at deeper issues. Attendees described a Snow White that barely resembled the character from the classic, with the dwarfs all but missing and the iconic love story stripped down to near non-existence. Disney's marketing department wrestled with how to spin these emerging details. One faction wanted to highlight the remake's fidelity to the original's magic, focusing on forest settings and glimpses of beloved songs. Another faction pushed the feminist angle, downplaying the prince and romance. As a result, trailers and press releases often felt disjointed, hinting at both an empowering transformation and a heartfelt homage. Viewers were left to wonder which version they would actually see. Adding to the strain, relatives of a key producer publicly vented on social media about Rachel Z's refusal to tone down her polarizing rhetoric. Screenshots of these exchanges circulated, confirming that behind Disney's polished facade, real tensions were boiling over. Fans, meanwhile, watched the drama unfold with a mix of horror and fascination. Some declared they had zero interest in a Snow White that spurned the prince and dwarfs. Others cheered any break from antiquated fantasies. Regardless of stance, few could ignore that the meltdown overshadowed everything else about the movie. Any conversation about its music, cinematography, or potential merits was drowned out by controversy. Then came the plot twist that shook everyone. Disney announced a second Snow White reboot, supposedly truer to the 1937 version. The timing was shocking. Rather than wait to see how the first remake performed, the studio effectively signaled that it expected a flop. Critics roasted Disney, accusing it of frantically trying to cover its losses. Fans, too, found the move baffling. Why embark on a new adaptation before the existing one had even premiered? Memes and jokes flew across social media. If at first you don't succeed, reboot again. Public sentiment suggested Disney had no real faith in the project they'd been promoting. Even loyalists who typically defended every studio decision threw up their hands, calling it a desperate pivot. Rumors circulated that the bigwigs wanted to salvage the Snow White brand before it drowned in negative reviews and terrible box office receipts. Merchandise sales echoed the public's mood. Snow White dolls and tie-in products gathered dust in toy aisles, even when steeply discounted. Parents who might have otherwise bought them hesitated, uncertain if this controversial version was an appropriate introduction to the fairy tale they'd grown up loving. Retailers openly complained about lackluster demand, a rare scenario for a Disney princess line. Industry experts foresaw a financial debacle. If the initial remake underperformed, dragging down consumer confidence, investing in a second film so soon sounded risky. Disney's legendary brand, which once nearly guaranteed success, suddenly looked vulnerable. And if the meltdown of its first princess couldn't be averted, fans wondered whether Disney had lost its knack for safeguarding the timeless magic that built its empire. No one involved in the production escaped the fallout. Rachel Z. was quietly pulled from major promotional circuits, with insiders suggesting the studio wanted to limit further damage. Other cast members began distancing themselves from controversial remarks, posting tributes to the original Snow White or clarifying how they personally adored the 1937 film. Crew members, costume designers, set decorators, choreographers, found their hard work eclipsed by the relentless PR meltdown. In Hollywood circles, the fiasco became a cautionary tale. Disney's typically ironclad approach to publicity had been undermined by a star who refused to toe the company line and by conflicting directives from internal teams. While corporate attempts to clamp down on negative press are nothing new, the speed and scale of this controversy took many by surprise. Meanwhile, Disney's broader image suffered. Articles with titles like Disney's Snow White, a fairy tale flame out, started appearing in mainstream media. Parents who'd once trusted the studio's brand implicitly questioned whether it was still the same happiest place on earth. Some felt Disney had grown arrogant, assuming it could sell audiences on any radical reinterpretation, no matter how dismissive of tradition. Others claimed the fiasco was a natural outcome of a studio that had become more interested in corporate synergy than the stories themselves. This breakdown in fan trust was perhaps the most devastating blow. Snow White wasn't just another princess story. It was the genesis of Disney's entire legacy. If the studio could bungle its foundational fairy tale so spectacularly, how reliable was its stewardship of other beloved properties? Amid the chaos, Disney released carefully worded statements promising they'd listen to fan feedback and would make the next reboot align more closely with the 1937 masterpiece. Insiders hinted the dwarfs would return to their comedic prominence, and the prince would play a bigger role. They also emphasized that new additions would be respectful updates, not sweeping rewrites. Many fans remained skeptical. After all, they'd seen the studio tout modern values before, only to alienate core audiences. Could Disney truly find a middle ground that celebrated the essence of the original while addressing contemporary tastes? The path to redemption lay in proving they understood that Snow White's kindness and the dwarfs' camaraderie formed the emotional heart of the story, not outdated relics to be discarded. Still, some held out hope. Disney's capacity for reinvention is legendary. A single smash hit, especially featuring one of its most iconic princesses, could restore luster to the brand. Themes of empowerment and self-reliance don't have to clash with romance and tradition. Many modern Disney films successfully merge them. The real question was whether the studio would choose a measured, respectful approach or double down on shock value changes that triggered the uproar in the first place. Zooming out, the Snow White saga captures a broader tension in Hollywood, balancing classic nostalgia with progressive reimaginings. Films like The Little Mermaid, 2023, faced similar critiques but managed to avoid such extreme backlash, suggesting it's possible to evolve cherished stories without gutting their heart. In Snow White's case, the controversy exploded because each new interview and rumor felt like an affront to the original spirit. This meltdown also underscored how crucial it is for studios to keep a unified message. When an actress publicly dismisses a story's legacy, and the studio fails to provide clear reassurance, fans are left feeling defensive. Not all updates are inherently negative, but the manner in which they're communicated can make or break audience goodwill. Disney's usual mastery of brand image seemed to vanish, replaced by a mess of clashing perspectives and relentless negative press. Ultimately, the true tragedy is how the artistry of the film itself got buried. Even a flawed adaptation involves hundreds, if not thousands, of skilled professionals working tirelessly behind the scenes. Artists, choreographers, lighting technicians, special effects teams. Their collective sweat and passion disappeared beneath the swirl of controversies, overshadowed by feuds and half-baked PR attempts. For a fairy tale that once symbolized the heights of imagination, this was a disheartening twist. In the final analysis, Disney's live-action Snow White fiasco serves as a stark reminder: no property, however legendary, is untouchable. While reimagining classics can breathe new life into beloved stories, it requires a deft hand, respect for the source material, and an understanding that fans don't welcome dismissive commentary on what they hold dear. The saga highlighted how easily an ambitious remake can devolve into chaos when creative vision clashes with marketing spin and outspoken talent. Can Disney salvage Snow White's reputation with a second reboot that embraces the 1937 film's magic? Possibly. The studio has weathered storms before, emerging stronger after taking stock of its missteps. A thoughtful, heartfelt adaptation that honors the original's warmth and musical joy could heal the rift, especially if Disney avoids the pitfalls of condescension and fully acknowledges the legacy it's building upon. But if that new reboot stumbles into the same traps, seemingly embarrassed by a classic's whimsical romance, overshadowing fairy tale charm with forced messaging, audiences may conclude that the Disney they once knew is gone. At that point, even the mightiest brand loyalty might not be enough to save the studio from itself. For now, the House of Mouse stands at a crossroads. Will it use this debacle as a much-needed wake-up call, recalling the very principles that made it a cultural titan? Or will Snow White's turbulent tale become a cautionary example of how even the greatest purveyor of magic can lose its way when it forgets the virtues that made it legendary in the first place? The answer will shape not just Snow White's future, but the fate of Disney's entire legacy, and whether happily ever after still holds any real meaning. With nearly a century of storied successes behind it, Disney's next moves may define Snow White's legacy for generations to come.